felt like I could give you one extra week. As I mentioned last time, I want it due before spring break because I don't want it looming over your head during spring break. I'd like you to hopefully enjoy at least part of your time, at least for our class. But I pushed it back to a week from today. So be working on that. Remember, as we talked about last time, it's worth 40 points, right? And the big thing, that's source. It's like an outline and source. And so the source piece of it by itself is worth 10 points. So the very first thing I'm going to do when I open your paper is I'm going to look to see if you have an academic source. And if you don't, you'll lose 10 points right off the bat. That's a lot. So please make sure that you put that academic source in there. And we talked about every single one of you could use the DSM. Make sure it's the DSM-5, but don't use the older one. But every single one of you could use the DSM. You could find an article online in the library database. It could be even a book. You are welcome to use more than one source. But you have to have at least one academic source. So let's say there's like a website that you really want to use. You could totally use that, but make sure you have an academic source as well. So if it ends in like a .com or .org or any of that, it's definitely not academic. So make sure that you have one of these things, and then you could use that too, if you would like. Yeah.
Does it not, or can we use something like the CDC, because I know they have a lot of like studies.
You can use it, but make sure you have one of these like as well, right? So it's still like, I mean, it's a better source than average, but still make sure you have these. And again, the DSM-5 would be one that every single one of you could probably benefit from because it's going to have the criteria for your disorder that you're thinking for your character. So easy one to use, and then you could always use that as well, or you can use as many as you want. You only need one, and then your show. This is for 40 points. So let's do next week. So we'll meet today, we'll meet Monday, we'll meet Wednesday, and then we have our second exam, which is 2 weeks from this Monday that just passed. So it's coming up, but we'll talk about that next week. For now, I'll be thinking about working on the paper. So I want to surviving the time change as we get further into the week. I hate this time change. Like it's been hard in my house. Like my kids will not get up in the morning. They're like, it's still dark. And they yell at me. I'm like, I know, I'm up too. I'm like, I'm not happy about it either. But is everyone hanging in there? I know this is like a brutal time of the semester. We're almost to spring break. It's coming. I have 10 days, 2 hours and 23 minutes. Just on a countdown. I don't know where they get the 23 minutes from. Like, I'm not sure how they figure that. My check-in time's at 11:30. So it's actually a little sooner than that. I'm just planning my meals. My daughter and I every night, how many burgers are you going to eat? 4. How many burgers are you going to eat? 12. I'm like, okay, good luck with that, right? My youngest is planning to eat 70 croissants for breakfast. She's like, it's a 7-day cruise. If I eat 10 each day, that's 70. I'm like, great math, right? But you're gonna have a stomach ache, right? She's like, oh no, I can handle it. I mean, she ate 52 on the last one. So it's possible, right? We got into a competition and I gave up. Like I was at like 36. I was like, I tap Paisley, you win. You win the croissant competition. Like I'm starting to get sick of them a little bit. So 70. We'll see. Are there any questions about the paper? Anything else about the paper for now? I'll check in with you on Monday and Wednesday next week, but just to make sure it's on your mind. And again, hang in there. I know a lot of you have expressed this is a hard part of the semester. So spring break is coming, we're getting there. And after that, it'll go really quickly because our spring break is so late. We basically have like a month left when we come back, and it'll go pretty fast from there. Nothing so far? Everyone good? Okay. Then we'll jump into chapter 9 today. We finished up everything on mood disorders. And then our guest speaker covered suicidality in chapter 7. So where we'll pick up today, eating disorders. So eating disorders and substance disorders is the next one that we'll talk about, chapter 10. But we'll look at 3 main ones. There's kind of 2 big eating disorders and then one that was added in the DSM-5. So anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, and then we'll look at causes and treatments. And as a group, this is kind of a difficult category of disorders. They're very common and they're very difficult to get rid of. because think about how complicated food can be, right? Like I just jokingly said that like all I can think about with this cruise is food, right? Like food is a big part of a lot of our lives. And we eat for a lot of reasons other than just being physically hungry, right? Like easy example. How many of you eat when you're bored? Out of show of hands. I'm so guilty on this one. Or when you're sad, right? Like you're unhappy, let's have some food, maybe sometimes. How many of you go out to eat to celebrate something good, right? Like got good grades, something good happened, go out to eat, right? Our motives for eating are complicated. Like I won't go to a movie unless I'm gonna have popcorn and candy and everything with it. Like those things are a big part of a movie for me. The food's a big part of holidays, vacations, trips. Like food can be a big part of customs. And so what happens is our motivations behind eating can get a little bit complicated, right? And it isn't always just about your body signals of hunger. And when people have an eating disorder, they have significant disturbances in eating. And so the essence of this is that you're eating or refusing to eat for more psychological reasons than like physical needs, right? So maybe you aren't listening to your body anymore. You're hungry, but you refuse to eat because you don't want to gain weight. Or you're full and you can't stop eating because it's helping you to cope with something, right? So you hit this point where it's like excessive food intake or maybe really restrictive food intake as more of like a mental or a psychological factor than a physical one. So again, a lot of people have like signs of eating disorders or like maybe like warning or risk signs, but some degree of that is normal. Like I guarantee every single one of you has had like a binge eating episode at some point, or maybe you ate to the point where you made yourself sick, or you were hungry and you didn't eat anyway, right? If you're doing these things every now and then, it's not a disorder, but when they become like a pattern or a routine and problematic, then we kind of cross over into that realm of being disordered. So we'll talk about, as I mentioned, we'll talk about anorexia and bulimia, but I have a little introduction to a documentary that was made. There's a really good one that was on Netflix, but this is a kind of a little bit older one that's about a bunch of young girls who are in a residential treatment center for eating disorders. That's really common that when this gets severe enough, people might be hospitalized. And so I think it's a good like introduction to this if you haven't known anyone who struggled with an eating disorder. It's like, I think it's about 7 minutes, but I'll play it for you. And then we'll introduction. If you haven't known anyone in your life who's had an eating disorder, right? They can be very consuming. And again, I think what makes them so tricky is just how often we have to deal with food, right? We need food in order to survive, at least to a degree. And so every time somebody is hungry, right, you're having to kind of face these triggers and face these cues. So it can definitely be something that is hard to shake and something that can be very consuming for people who have them. And we'll talk about, you know, the different kind of criteria and disorders, but I wanted you to have that human element to it. You saw a lot of anorexia in that documentary, also a lot of bulimia, right? You see a little bit of both. And as a side note, when we've talked about this before, sometimes people don't fit neatly into one or the other. And so they might have like an eating disorder not otherwise specified, which could be some blend of the two. Sometimes people kind of go back and forth between the two of them. But with anorexia, we're looking at a disorder where there's a really intense fear of weight gain. There's also a distorted body image that comes with it. Somebody who's kind of pursuing extreme loss of weight and thinness. So there's a lot of like restricted eating, not eating when you're hungry. So some of the criteria, there's a few. There's a refusal to maintain a normal body weight. For your age and height. Now, normal body weight, right? How are we defining normal body weight? You know, there are all sorts of scales and criteria for how we tend to do that. So like to give us a little bit of a metric, we tend to go with less than 85% of your expected weight. Right, so it gives us a little bit of room, but less than 85% of the weight that you should be in a range of for your height and your age. right? And so we all have like a kind of a natural weight that we're at and weights that we should be at based on our body type. And you're less than 85% of that. So you're underweight by definition of the disorder. There's that extreme thinness component to it. The second part is there's an intense fear of gaining weight. So oftentimes someone who has this disorder has a really hard time like eating normally. They're counting calories like really excessively, fears of eating like even little things that might cause them to gain weight, right? So even though you're underweight, you have this intense fear of gaining weight, which leads to very, very restrictive eating. And then the last part is you have a disturbance in your self-view. So oftentimes what we'll say is that you have an undue influence of weight. On like your self-worth, how you view yourself. Like, so you're giving your weight like a lot of weight when it comes to how you view yourself. So everything about your identity, your personality, your sense of worth, your level of attractiveness is very influenced by your weight. Right. And it could be like even little changes in it can be something that like very drastically affect you. So again, very underweight, refusing to eat, very restrictive eating, fear of gaining weight, and then like a distorted body image or a disturbance in your self-view. Right. Think about the one girl in the video. She draws herself on the wall, right? And then they trace her. And you can see how much like smaller than the picture that she drew she actually is. And then she's writing like need to tone, abdominoplasty, help me, right? Like really focused on her body image and having that kind of distorted view of what she looks like versus what she actually looks like. And so that's something that you see a lot with this disorder. So oftentimes people, again, are very, very thin, right? They're very, very underweight as a result. Most common by far between with girls between the ages of 14 to 18. Now, it can obviously affect men as well and affect people who are younger and older, but that's by far the most common group, right? Young women or girls who are in the ages of 14 to 18, right? And it can lead to all sorts of issues as people like will lose hair and nails if they're really like nutrient deficient. It can cause some medical problems like a loss of a menstrual cycle and so on, like cracking of the skin, very brittle hair and nails. So it can be kind of a dangerous condition if it's something that goes on for a long time. And I imagine a lot of you have probably known people who struggle with the anorexia. I mean, any like comments or stories? I grew up with a mom who had anorexia. And I remember for her, if she weighed over 99 pounds, she thought that she was overweight. So like her whole life, it was like she had to be under 100. Right. And it was something that really like, I remember as a kid, I thought she'd blow away in the wind, right? It's windy outside. I remember as a kid, I was like, she's going to blow away because she was always so thin. And for her number that caused like this disturbance and pressure was 99. Couldn't weigh over that. There was a hand over here somewhere. Was it?
She's older, but she's kind of struggling with it. And she's
Yeah.
eating like she's just like so extremely skinny, but she like almost like gets her like food through feeding other people, and she'll like buy so much food for everyone, and just like constantly be like giving it. Like even like for dogs, like she'll like feed her dog like human food and stuff. Like she gets like satisfaction from it.
Sure, but not to herself.
But not to her. She
Yeah, and you know, in a way, like adaptive to find a way to like you know, try and fit in like socially with food that way, because it can sometimes be really difficult for people. But yeah, when it's restrictive for themselves, it becomes a bit of a problem. Other people, other like thoughts or stories, people in your life, any thoughts that come to mind with this one? Could be challenging again because people are hungry, right? You're hungry, but you're refusing to eat. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to lose weight. Just to like back up for a minute, a lot of people are at some point trying to lose weight or maybe even gain weight and get more muscular, right? It can go either way. But when it becomes like extreme and it's everything in your life, that's when we start to put it at like more of an eating disorder. Right, so this is a very, very common one, but not everybody who has this is underweight. And sometimes that's an issue, right? This normal body weight criteria sometimes interferes with diagnosis. And sometimes what that will lead to then is people being diagnosed with this, or like some combination of the two. So with bulimia, we have a slightly different like presentation and pattern. Let me erase this. It still tends to affect girls between the ages of 14 and 18 the most commonly, so I can leave that. And this one is still something that is very much a part of the diagnosis. But with this one, people have recurrent episodes of binge eating. The recurrent episodes of binge eating. Now, to define binge eating, we have a rough definition, which is really unsatisfying. So we say within a 2-hour period of time, eating more than most would eat. Which is incredibly subjective, right? Like what you eat versus what I eat versus what the person next to you eats, all might be a little bit different. But the idea is that you're eating a lot of food within a very short period of time, right? Often in private because you're embarrassed about it. And then the other piece is there's a lack of control during the binge eating episode, almost like you can't stop, right? So even though you're full, people might eat to the point where it causes them to throw up, right? Because they are so full and they're just kind of ignoring it, or you can't find a way to get yourself to stop. That's a really big part of this. So people have these binges. And again, most of us have probably binged at some point, right? I was grading papers a couple of weeks ago and I ate an entire carton of goldfish without even realizing it. Like I was just like mindlessly eating them as I was grading. And then I reached in and there weren't any more in there, right? Like technically, I mean, you could say it was a binge, I suppose, right? But a little bit of this is okay, right? Like maybe on holidays, you binge a little bit more, like Thanksgiving is a binge day in general, right? But if you're doing this repeatedly, right, you have these occurring like, you know, with some degree of regularity, then it's a little bit different. After you binge, people engage in compensatory behaviors to prevent weight gain. So you ate all this food and then you compensate for eating that food in some way to prevent yourself from gaining weight from it. What are some ways that somebody might engage in like a compensatory behavior? Yeah. Okay, so you skip your next meals, right? That would be one way to compensate. Yeah. Forcing yourself to throw up, really common. Yeah. Over exercising, that's the other really big one, or using laxatives, maybe excessively is another way this could manifest. You do something to keep yourself from gaining weight from all the food you just ate, right? And so that's kind of the key piece of this is that you have this cycle that's occurring, which is why we sometimes call it binge purge syndrome. You binge and then you purge, whether that's through exercising or being restrictive or vomiting or whatnot. And you're doing these things, these binges and compensatory behaviors at least 2 times a week. I'll put this right here, 2 times a week for 3 months or more. So this one actually has a little bit of like a time criteria to it. 2 times or more a week, you're binging and purging. Now, for some people, this can be 2 times a day, right? Or it could be quite a bit more than that, but it has to at least occur twice a week or more on average for at least 3 months. So a little bit different pattern, right? Where people are eating quite a bit and then getting rid of it through some kind of compensation as a way to avoid gaining weight. Right. And this one, again, very common, right? Just as common, affecting the same group. And we're seeing a rise in the cases of these in men as well. But they do tend to primarily affect women. Any stories or comments about bulimia? People you know in your life with bulimia struggled with it? Any thoughts or comments or anything? I have a kind of maybe an opportunity to think about it critically a little bit. A lot of people do things with food for a variety of reasons, right? Maybe it's, eating bizarre things to get views on social media, which is super popular, and sometimes dangerous. Or maybe competing in food competitions, right? Which can often lead to vomiting afterward. But so I want to play a clip for you. And I want you to be thinking as you watch this clip, do you think these individuals have an eating disorder? Why or why not? Or maybe are they on the road to it? Are you concerned about them? It's a group of like competitive eaters in a hot dog eating competition. It might make you never want hot dogs again. The way that they eat them is kind of a little bit gross. But I think it's a good opportunity to kind of think critically about this and how does maybe being an athlete or competing or different elements like that feed into this a little bit. So as a result though, so I don't know, what do you think? I mean, these people are obviously eating in a way that's very abnormal, right? Like, nobody eats 7 hot dogs in a minute, like in a normal like environment. But what do you think? Do you think they have an eating disorder? Or not? Like, are you concerned? Would you be concerned? Yeah, go here in the back. Yeah.
Insurance that we told us they probably don't have a disorder.
Okay.
It's not like, I don't know, unless they're doing it like 2 times a week for more than 3 months, but it seems like it's, I don't know, I'm assuming that's an annual thing.
Yeah.
Or maybe biannual, I don't know.
There's a lot of those competitions, but yeah, it is like spread out, probably not fitting those criteria. Yeah.
I don't think it's impossible that some of them could have eating disorders.
Yeah.
I guess my general takeaway is that it doesn't seem like a good idea, but I can't exactly discern motive or what's going on in their lives. So from the one-off, it's very hard to tell if, like she said, they don't have that it's just once a year, or if they do have a disorder and this is an indulgence.
Okay. Could be either.
It could very well be either, and I don't have enough info to go on.
Okay, I like it. Yeah.
These, assuming they don't have something else going on in their lives, they do not have eating disorder because of how simple it is.
Okay. Okay, right, so unusual, but doesn't quite fit the criteria. Anybody else? Other thoughts? Yes, no, right? Do you think that they have motivations for these things? Like, right? They get a lot of money if you win these competitions. Kobayashi, there's a whole documentary about this guy. He's famous and he's absolutely ripped too. Like his metabolism is crazy. Like he works out constantly. They train for these events. Like I went into the wrong line of work, right? Like I should have been a competitive food trainer, but I could never eat hot dogs like that, right? I don't think I eat 10 in a year, let alone 10 in a minute. But they train constantly, right? And yes, they throw up afterward oftentimes, right, to get that food out of their system. But they are motivated by money and attention and social media. It gets complicated, right? I don't know the answer whether or not they have an eating disorder or not, but I think it's really interesting to think about. And you could draw a lot of parallels to things like people who are dancers or boxers or wrestlers who have to fit into certain categories of weight, right? Not uncommon for people who are dancers to have to lose a lot of weight to fit that body type, or people who are wrestling to have to bulk up or trim down to stay within a class where they are able to be more successful. And so the motivations behind eating or not eating or eating too much and bulking up and like being thin can get really, really complicated, right? And that's just kind of something to keep in the back of your mind. There's a lot of examples where I'd be like, yeah, I think they like have some red flags, but I'm not sure they have an eating disorder or not. I don't know what is motivating what, right? Like you were saying, it could go either way. But I think it's interesting to think about. These are common things that people have. A lot of us, again, very complicated relationships with food. The last one up here, binge eating disorder, and I put the criteria on here. Someone's newer and added it later. With this disorder, binge eating disorder, people binge, but they don't purge, right? And that's where it's different from bulimia. With this, people are eating and they're having those binge eating episodes, but they don't do anything to get rid of that food. So oftentimes what happens is they gain a lot of weight from it. And then right? So this oftentimes leads to a lot of weight gain because people are eating but not getting rid of it. Right. And so with this, what we see is that people have binge eating episodes where they eat a large amount of food, not necessarily due to hunger of any kind. Right. And they eat until they're uncomfortably full. They eat very quickly. And it's often done alone, right? We often call it closet eating, right? Or you eat in someplace privately because you don't want people to see the amount of food that you're eating, right? And you might feel disgusted with yourself or depressed or guilty after a binge eating episode, but you don't do anything like purging it or exercising excessively or vomiting to get rid of it, right? And so it's just kind of a slightly different presentation. Kim, crazy Kim, with the Y, right? My partner's sister, it was very much a binge eater, right? And literally would do it in her closet. Like I remember early in our relationship, we watched her house, like her dog while she was gone somewhere. And in her closet, she had rows and rows of candy bars like hidden. And I felt like I walked into like Wonka's, like I was like so excited. I was like, there's candy everywhere. And my partner was like, don't touch it. She knows exactly how many of them are there, like is very aware of it. But she would literally like eat in her closet alone because she was so embarrassed about it, right? And would just gain so much weight from it as a result. Right. So with this, it's occurring at least once a week for 3 months, and there's no pattern of like compensatory behavior, but it can obviously be quite a bit more than that as well, just at least once a week for 3 months. Much more common again in women than in men. But we see this one is new, and it was added to kind of reflect a pattern that we noticed where there wasn't any weight loss or compensatory behavior. Yeah.
And for the eating alone, this is part of the criteria.
Yeah, so you have to have 3 or more of those. So it
Oh,
might not
3 or
be,
more.
it might not be that they always eat alone, but it's often someone is embarrassed, right? About the amount of food that they're eating and they don't want other people to see it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about like mukbangers,
Mhm.
and like, I just wonder what's going on there, like, how would you really think about that?
Well, so describe it a little bit. Like, what do you?
You live stream and they eat
Right.
like insane amounts,
Mhm.
like consistently, like that's their profession.
Yeah,
And so I always like wonder, like, I don't know.
yeah. Again, it's
Yeah.
kind of like that complicated, right? It's motivated by money and it's motivated by attention. But does that mean we can ignore what might be driving it, right? Is it again that they're doing that because they found a niche to like make money?
Yeah.
And people like to watch that stuff, right? Or is it that this is like purely for like the motivation matters a little bit, right? So if somebody's doing it purely for money and fame or like attention in social media stuff, I'd be less concerned than if there was something driving it. But that doesn't mean it isn't still problematic, right? Yeah. It's complicated. It's so complicated. And like, there's so many odd things with food on social media. Like, I have a friend who doesn't like to eat alone. So she puts on videos of people eating and watches them while she eats so she doesn't have to eat alone. And I'm like, just call me over. I'll eat with you. Anytime you want to eat, I'll come eat with you, right? But I mean, like, so odd. You can go on and like, she just literally watches videos of people just sitting and eating their meals, right? And she'll do that while she eats as a way to have company, right? If you want to watch people eat random things or way too many things or things that will make them sick. I mean, all the food competition shows like Man versus Food and like, you know, like how big of an item can you eat and like still hold on to it? It gets really complicated. And so the motivation, I think, is a big piece. There was a hand over here. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, like, going off of what she said, there's actually a famous, mukbanger, I don't know if I'm saying it right. And his name is Nico Conrad.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I actually did an in-depth study on him in
Uh-huh.
the senior year of high school. And like, I basically studied like his rise and fall.
Uh-huh.
And like, he definitely crosses over into like, maybe someone who started for money.
Yeah.
But it ended up being a major eating
Right.
disorder.
Yeah.
Binge disorder, yeah.
That's a great example of how it can get complicated, right? You have somebody who like is doing it for money, but it can lead to more, or it could be somebody who was doing it because of a disorder and they found a way to make money off of it and like make it healthier in some way, right? It can go either way. I've heard of that person. My kids are like obsessed with like random weird things that they find online and stuff like that. Or they'll come in my room and be like, look what I found. I'm like, what are you watching? Stop, right? But I mean, there's just so much of it that's odd, right? I mean, not that long ago, what was it, like 2 years ago, the whole like Tide Pod challenges where people were like eating things that like could kill you because they wanted to get views, right? And like a lot of people watch that stuff. It's wild. Other like thoughts or comments, other stuff related to this at all? Anything else? Yeah, sure.
Just like something I think is interesting is that none of the criteria really mentioned like the physical health.
I know.
person.
Yeah.
So last one,
Mhm.
eating disorder. For me personally,
Yeah.
I started doing intermittent fasting, which keeps me from eating like 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
And that combined with like working out a lot, I would say just based on the first three, I would qualify for this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting thinking about that, like intermittent fasting is like a huge thing right now, right? Like it has been for a couple of years, but like how many of you have done that at some point? Right? Like look around, like a lot of you, myself included, I don't eat after 6 p.m. Like I don't. Like I stop at 6. Like part of that is it gives me like awful like reflex, like if I eat too much after that. But another part of it is just trying to not I don't eat between like 6 and like 10 in the morning, right? And that's a long stretch of time. And then what ends up happening is like in the other hours, I eat quite a bit, right? So yeah, and I'm hungry, right? So I mean, I guess like I still have the physical hunger. But I eat until I'm full. I'm like, it's my window, I'm eating, right? And like, and it's could easily fit into here, I guess, at times, right? So yeah, it's complicated, right? And our culture is obsessed with weight loss, right? It's wild, like the intermittent fasting and all the medications and the gummies and like all the fake ads and like products like that are out there. There's a lot related to this. And we don't always talk about the health piece, right? Because that could be for your health, right? It could be a very positive thing to help your health, or it could be hurting you, depending on the severity of like your fasting. Some people fast for days at a time, which is really hard on your system, but it could be for a lot of different reasons. I mean, it's a great point, right? I think a lot of us could fit some of these criteria. And it's not until it's starting to like affect your health and be a problem. Maybe you don't go out with other people because you can't eat with them, where it starts to be a little more of an issue. Anything else? Any other thoughts related to this? Let's look at some causes and treatments and so on. Like most disorders, this is a very like multi-dimensional risk perspective, which means that there's a lot of different factors at play. And the more of them that you have, the more at risk you might be for having one of these disorders, right? So it could be that you have only some of them, but the more of them you have, the more likely your risk is to develop one of these. So there are psychological factors, interpersonal factors, biological factors, and then cultural and societal factors. So a lot of different things coming into play. With these like psychological factors, these could be things like low self-esteem. Self-esteem and eating disorders are often very correlated. Could also be feelings of inadequacy or a lack of control. A lot of eating disorders is actually related to control. I can control what I put in my body and what comes out of my body. I can control the amount of calories that I consume. There's an element of control to it that tends to be a big piece for people. So feeling out of control or feeling inadequate, struggling with anxiety or depression or loneliness. Sometimes when people feel lonely or depressed, they try to fill that hole with food, right? And that's very commonly correlated with binge eating disorder. Mood disorders, as I said, very, very like high correlation here. But a lot of things related to like self-esteem and control, anxiety, depression, and so on. And those are very common things to see with this, and they might be the motivating factor behind it. Interpersonal factors are also big, and I would say they might even be the biggest thing up here, right? Other people, right? The presence of other people and the things that other people say. Our families have a culture around food. Think about your family, right? Whether it's the family you grew up in or the family you have now, but people that you have lived around, right? Families have cultures around food, right? My family has like a huge propensity for sweets and desserts, right? Like we get cake for no reason. Like I remember when my partner and I first started dating, we got like a big old cake and she's like, what's the cake for? Whose birthday is it? I'm like, oh, it's Tuesday. Like naturally we're having cake, right? And she was like, well, why? Like, why not? Right? Like it was like this whole like weird, like she was like, why are we having birthday cake, right? I was like, well, why wouldn't we? Like, it was so natural to me. Like my family always got like cakes randomly. We go to the store and we would just do that. And every now and then we go to the store and be like, let's go get dinner. And it was just dessert, right? Like it was just normal for us. Like, and that's what I grew up in. Her family, a lot of the people in her family have diabetes. And so she didn't grow up with dessert. They didn't eat dessert. Dessert for them was like, I don't know, something sad to me, right? And so I remember in the beginning of our relationship, every time I would go over to her family's house for dinner, dinner would come and then I'd wait and be like, where's dessert? Like waiting for dessert. Like, of course it's coming, right? No dessert. And it was like the saddest thing ever, but their family didn't do it. It wasn't normal for their culture. After 20, almost 21 years, now they always have dessert. Like I've changed them for the better, right? So now every time we have dinner and there's dessert that comes after for the children, of course, it's for the children. They're always like, we brought cookies for the kids. And I'm like, and they're like, and the big kid, right? I'll take. But like your family has a culture around what's normal. Is your family really active and work out and value like physical fitness or not? Right? That family culture as well. I have my daughter's on a softball team and the coach, like their whole family, they like work out together all weekend. Like we sit around and watch movies and eat popcorn, they work out, right? Like different family cultures and they're all happy with it and we're happy with it and it's fine. But that can very much shape like what's normal to you versus what's normal to somebody else. You also get a lot of attitudes and things your parents say that might stick with you. Are you really going to eat that? You shouldn't eat all of that, right? Like, what are the things that your parents and family are saying to you, or your siblings, or your partners, or your friends? And so when people have a lot of that kind of influence, it can be a problem, right? I remember as a kid, like I said, my mom had an eating disorder. My dad carried a picture around of her in his wallet, and it was when she was at her thinnest. And those things, like, they sit with you, right? Like that's the picture that he chose. And like that to her meant like, that's what he finds me attractive. I have to stay at that weight. So like those little subtle influences can be a really big deal. Being teased or bullied at school, right? For kids, this can start really young. And like I have like a child nemesis in my life. Her name is Addison. And I hate this girl. And I feel so bad saying that because I'm not a very like violent person. But my daughter, Kaya, who's now 11, has always been like a little bigger. Like she came out 9.5 pounds. She was ready to go, ready to eat, ready to face the world. Sturdy, like she was so healthy, right? And is still so healthy and wonderful. But she came out, she's always been a little taller than average. She's always been a little heavier than average. This is just genetics. And like, I'm sorry, you got my stomach and my like flat butt. Like, I'm sorry, you got those things from me. I can't help it, right? And so this poor kid, like, she was in kindergarten and she kept coming home with her lunch. Like she wouldn't eat her lunch. And we couldn't figure it out for the longest time. And as a kindergartner, she didn't have, a ton of like language, like to explain. And she kept telling us that she just was busy playing and she didn't get to it. Like, I don't have a lot of time. I wanted to play instead. And we let it go and we let it go, but it kept happening and happening. And finally, after like 2 months, she told us that this little girl, Addison, waiting for Addison in the parking lot today. Like if you ever hear that I went to jail, it's because I took this kid out. She's still in her class in middle school. All these years later, she's still a bully. She told us that Addison told her that she couldn't eat her food because they were bad choices and it was going to make her fatter. And so this little kid, kindergarten, 5, 6 years old, like made my daughter feel like she couldn't eat her food. And my daughter would come home starving and crying because she was so hungry because she didn't feel like she could eat at school in front of this bully. Right. And so it took like so much time to reverse that and get her to feel healthy about like her body. Like she'd come home and be like, how do I get a flat stomach if I want a flat stomach? Like, Angel, you're 8. Like we'll show you how to do sit-ups if you want to know how to do them, but like, you're perfect the way that you are. Like the bullying and the teasing and the presence of other people is absolutely huge for people, especially when they're little. And there's so much of that. Like, I couldn't believe it started that early in kindergarten, with other people like saying stuff like that. And I'm like, what does Addison have in her lunch that's so healthy? Like, open her lunchbox up. Let's check this out. Like, we talked to her mom, like rather than like deal with it through the school, like we called her mom and like had this whole conversation. Like, your kid is bullying our kid. And it just like never stopped. And as I said, she still bullies. They're in 6th grade now. And now she bullies about other things, right? I seriously want to like run this kid.
I might be waiting, I might be waiting the party.
See? Right, let's go today. They get out. 3:00, let's go. Posse together.
What did your mom say?
Yeah, I mean, her mom apologized and but her mom, you could see where she got it from.
I was wondering,
When we
is
talked
there
to
any
her.
rejection?
Yeah, her mom was like, well, I'm trying to teach her healthy choices and healthy foods. And I'm like, and that's totally fine for your daughter. And like, if that's, yeah, I love that, right? Yeah, I had a few. I had to walk away and my partner had that conversation on the phone instead. But yeah, I mean, like you could see where it came from. You could see the family culture and the mentality around it.
It's sad
And
for her, for honestly, but-
Addison.
It's sad for her.
Yeah, it is sad, right? And she's an awful person, right? But still, right? Like it was sad. Like, and like I imagine she felt a lot of pressure with the things that she was eating, right? Maybe coming from her parents as well. But it starts that early, right? There's all sorts. I've seen so many clips in the media. You see a parent say to their kid, "Are you really going to eat all that?" Or like, "You really shouldn't eat all that. You don't need to eat all that." Like, and those little comments, I mean, they sink in and they stay with you, right? And so you get these like interpersonal elements that can make people feel really bad about the choices that they're making, right? Or feel like they're unattractive. If your friend group is all like not eating, you might feel like you can't eat, right? All of those things are definitely in play. Anyone have like examples of that in your life? That doesn't have to be an Addison, right? We gather up all the Addisons together. But anyone have examples of that in your life, like family or friends or bullies or things like that? Or we're sharing it?
I don't know if I would consider this healthy, but we used to call my dad a human garbage disposal. Cause he would just eat all the leftovers.
Sure.
So like, it was I guess it was more of a good influence for me. So it was like, oh, eat your fill, you know?
Yeah.
So that was always funny, cause he just eats and eats and eats, that guy.
Yeah.
And he never gained weight when he was younger, so he just eats and eats and eats.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not necessarily problematic, right?
It was like that's why I said it was more of a healthy thing.
Yeah.
So, like, it was like growing up, I felt like I could eat.
Mhm.
Like I felt like I could eat my fill until I felt good.
Yeah. And that's a good thing, right? You want to feel like it's okay to eat. Hey, you said that, it's funny they call him that on all of my kids' phones. My name is Cake Eater. Like, I don't know who came up with that, but they're like, Cake Eater is calling. I'm like, hey, no, that's not who I am to you. Right? I put my name on all, it's like at Cake Eater, like, all right, right. So, and now you know, that's my kids call me Cake Eater, apparently, not to my face, but on their phones, like all 3 of them. And that's a picture of me on our last cruise holding cake. Like, I don't know how they got together and came up with this, but I think it's hilarious, right? Yeah.
Like tall and sturdier, like I always just had swimmer shoulders because I was a swimmer.
Sure.
But because I was in Camarillo, everybody was like a little dancer,
Hmm.
and it was really awful because all I wanted was like,
Yeah.
and it's like, no, you're like 12 and 5'6". Like I literally haven't grown since 12th grade. Like I've been this tall and pretty 12th grade since I was 12. Like I was
Sure.
just a tall, big kid. I was muscular. I was a swimmer. I was a really
Yeah.
good swimmer. But forever, I'm like, doesn't matter. I'm really dancer, so nobody's gonna have a crush on me. It's not a cute.
Reba,
Mhm.
and I look like, a linebacker, and it's like, but then like as I got older and as I got better in swimming, I was like, no, like no, they can't do what I can do, and that's like sports actually can help.
Let's race, right?
In rugby, it doesn't matter what size, you can be great at something.
Yeah.
And it was super helpful, so I really, really found sports to be like, yeah, those ballerinas can't do what I do, but maybe I can't do what a ballerina can do.
Yeah.
Maybe
It's cool as fuck to be buffed. dude. It's fun.
it's just.
Yeah.
And then it's like that idea kind of changed as I became more of a serious athlete. It was just a bit shitty.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
For sure. When you're surrounded by that, how do you not compare? Right? How do you not have that thought? Like, and that's so normal, right? And then luckily finding a better culture and group of people to be around, like when you find like your tribe in a sense, right? Or where you fit in, like it can be so helpful. But yeah, it's just really difficult to like be surrounded by that. You compare it. I don't know why that reminded me, like in terms of like family culture, my partner's family, she's like the only one that still has an intact stomach. Like her whole family's had gastric bypass surgeries. And they lost a ton of weight from it. Like, I mean, they kind of cheated in a way. Like they didn't learn better ways. They just couldn't eat. And they lost it in like too quickly where it was like unhealthy. But like, it's like that same comparison of like, we'll go out to eat and none of them eat. Like they eat the tiniest amount. And my partner's always like, I feel like awful eating. I'm like, Nana, you enjoy your food. They're all going to throw up. You're going to be like happy and not throwing up. It's impossible when you're surrounded by something to not compare, and those things seep in and then they can affect you. And I'm glad it ended in yeah.
I relate so much to what she's saying.
Yeah.
I also grew up in Thousand Oaks, and I've always just been bigger.
Mhm.
And I was in ballet classes, and my teacher told me in front of everyone that I'm too fat to be a ballerina.
Holy shit.
I can't be a ballerina.
See, let's get her an Addison. Anyone want to add it?
Like since 12, like I developed very, very quickly.
Sure.
But what's interesting, like, I don't know if it's a cultural thing or what, like when I would visit my family, like in LA, like I was the smallest person. So it was like when I was out here in a different demographic, I was big, curvy, you're too fat, blah.
Mhm.
But then in another demographic, I was very small and
Right.
needed to eat more.
Mhm.
So it was like really interesting.
Yeah, and the difference between the two is wild, right? Like in one
Yeah.
group, they have one way and another,
Uh-huh.
and then hopefully, you hope you find a middle ground where you're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I'm okay,
I
right?
definitely feel great and still like, I went to my gym to do like the BMI thing. And they're like, you're obese. And I was like, no, you want my money. Sorry. I know I'm not obese. Do not tell me that. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
We support.
yeah, obese? What? No.
It's the BMI stuff is super complicated, right? Like
Yeah.
I know, according to mine, I'm obese as well. I'm like, thanks. Like that's kind of you to say, right? And I mean, it's all based off of like, calculations that in a lot of ways are very outdated. And they don't take into account like things like bone density and like things like that. I mean, sometimes you can't help genetics, right? Like if you have broader shoulders, maybe that's, a beautiful thing for being a swimmer or being whatever, right? And so it's tough when you're fighting those battles, right? There's a bunch of other, yeah.
It's helpful to have some little ways of thinking. See your folks that don't be like really cautious about what you should like over it's not bad, whatever, you'll do things of skin helping each other, but I don't really think do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, you can have some of the thoughts there and then never act on them, right? And I think a lot of us have those thoughts. A lot of us have moments of like, I feel fat or I'm not happy with my body or whatever. And you probably can't see all the people behind you nodding, right? It's just really common, right? Our culture values appearance so much that like, I think those things are common to have. And they could be kind of risk factors that you have to keep an eye on, right? If they ever escalate, but it's really common to have the thoughts. And you might not ever act on them. And yeah.
I actually was probably kind of an Addison when I was like a kid, which sucks. I know.
I'm just kidding.
No, like, and I know that, but like when I was really young, my brother was like a little bit like slightly overweight.
Mhm.
And like, I would follow my parents' lead and like kind of pick on him for it. Like, I wouldn't even pick on him in the sense of just being mean, but I would be like, you really need to be more healthy.
Yeah.
Or I would like give him like the side eye when he was like eating like a bit more than maybe like, I guess he should for his height and weight.
Mm-hmm.
Or I mean height and age. But like as I grew older, I realized how much of like a detrimental effect it had on his mental health. And
Yeah.
I like still apologize to him for this to this day because it's like
Yeah.
it was really bad. And also like everything was kind of weird for me because I'm the only thin person in my family. So like I felt a lot of pressure to stay that way.
Sure.
It was really weird. Like I definitely had a lot of disordered eating
Mhm.
growing up, like since probably like the 4th grade. Like I remember like saying it out loud for the first time in the 4th grade, like to my mom, I'm like, Mom, my arms are bigger than they used to be,
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
And to reframe it in a nicer way, I mean, it might be that you were trying to look out for, your brother to not have those same struggles, right? Look at, like, we've just made you such a kind, like, we could change it to that, right? And it could be that it was motivated in that way. And a lot of us do those things, like sometimes it's too easy to have those comments come out, right? And it can be motivated by good, but not said in the best way, right? Yeah, you can forgive yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
My mom, my mom's Latina, she's Chicano, but like, she's like bigger and like curvier. She loves the song Fat Bottom Girls by Queen, and she listens to that over and over and over.
Uh-huh. She's like, it's my anthem, right?
But, so that's just what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
And then as for like societal factors, because we have a lot of, in our culture, we have a lot of like this obsession with like perfection and body. Soulsborne games, like Bloodborne, there's this company called From Software, and they make Dark Souls, which is a popular video game.
Mhm.
And their games have a lot of body horror, but it's like in a way that normalizes different body types. Like in this game Sekiro, which is like a samurai shinobi game, the strongest character in the game, he's extremely thin.
Okay.
Like you can see his ribs, and it's not like an unhealthy thing. That's just the way he looks.
Mhm.
And like it always, I was playing this game and I was like, wow, because I'm really thin. And even the main character, like he's not extremely muscular. He's kind of just like got a normalized body. I was like, damn, like this makes me feel very comfortable because these characters that like are supposed to be pinnacles of have like normal bodies, like they're not super built,
Right.
and they're just kind of normal. So like I think mediums like that promote like different body types, because there's nothing wrong with being big. Like there's
No.
nothing wrong with having big shoulders.
And there's nothing wrong with being small either,
Exactly.
right? Yeah,
And
yeah,
people are just-
right.
the view of there being one ideal body that you have to be toward, like this Hollywood man or this like Barbie doll figure, is extremely unhealthy because there are just different types of bodies.
Yeah.
So I think like those games are cool.
And your genetics, like, it's funny, they always say your genes determine the size of your genes, right? Like, and right, that's a good one, right? And so it's tough. I mean, some of it you can't change, like to a degree you can, but only so much. And I had to laugh in my head when you said like, my partner's family is all Hispanic. And every time we go there, it's like, eat, you're so thin, eat. Like, I went to a baby shower and her grandma was like, you need to eat, just shoving plates of food at me. I'm like, trust me, I'm okay, right? Like, she's like, you're thinner than last time, eat, right? And like, I mean, culture and your family, like, it's so big in terms of like what you feel is normal and like acceptable. And it's nice when there are a variety of representations, right? When you can see yourself in somebody like that, right? Did you have a thought with that, or, and then I'll come over here? Okay. We'll defer. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Help with like body image, whereas there's other sports, for example, like I grew up in track and field. And I had
Yeah.
a very hardcore coach that during season, we had a track diet.
Yeah.
And there were certain things, and they sent home like packets of what we could eat during the week and what we couldn't eat during the week leading up to race day. And I just think it's super interesting because I also played soccer, and that coach was like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Why are you? No, you need to eat this, 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 and this. And then my other coach would be like, well, she can't eat that. She can't do this. She can't do that.
You're like, I don't know what to do, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
I think it's more society, like for track and field, you have to be a certain
Yeah.
look as a track runner. Like you have to
Mhm.
be very like lean muscle, lean this, lean that. Soccer, don't need to be leaning on, you need to have
Right.
like, the biggest muscle. So I think it's very interesting how society kind of doesn't
Yeah.
the way an athlete's supposed to be.
And if you find your sport where like you fit in kind of like you were describing, like when you find, you know, the one that like fits what best works for you, it's so nice, right? Because they can be so different, right? Like wrestlers and boxers and track and field and dancers, right? There's a lot of expectations that go with those like sports and those activities. And it can be hard for people who are in them, especially when you have two different coaches telling you two completely different things. You're like, I'm just trying to play these sports, right? And makes it tough. Did you want to?
The sports industry, but basically what it was I forgot what year it was, but it was pretty recent. It was every female Olympian with a gold medal in her sport, and it's just the coolest thing to look at. Because you're like, these are the best of the best, peak condition for their sport.
Yeah.
And their condition, their body has made them the greatest in the world. And you just see like this crazy array of like everybody, like different body types, and it's really, really cool, because you're like, yeah, because you can look and you can go, oh my gosh, yeah, I look like that. Like, it's just like, so, I don't know, it's nice.
That is really cool, right? Because there is a variety, like naturally, we all have genetics that predispose us to body types, right? And there's not a whole lot you can always do to fix that, but you can like work with what you have and find the best ways to like feel comfortable or get into the right sport. And I love that because different sports and different things call for different body types, right? And it's nice when there's more of that variety. Yeah, if you find the image, you should send it to me. Yeah.
Would you consider specific diets to be eating disorder in some way? Because usually diets last longer than like 3 weeks or like a month or something like that.
Sure. I mean, it could be like a lot of people have like problematic relationships with food. And so it could be that, or it could just be motivated by health, right? Like for me personally, like I started intermittent fasting because I have high blood pressure. It runs in my family, right? I just, it runs in my genetics. And so I have to be careful. Like if my weight is too high, my blood pressure is too high, and I don't want to be on medication for that. And so for me, it was motivated by health, right? Can that go too far? Definitely, right? But a lot of people are on diets. It's something like 2/3 of people at any given moment are on a diet. Like I won't ask you to admit it, but I would bet like anything that more than half of the people in this room are probably watching what they eat or exercising for some reason, right? It's just so common. It could be a risk factor and it could become problematic, but there's nothing wrong with wanting to be healthy or losing weight. I would also add on the other side, a lot of people who are quite thin sometimes face discrimination of their own when it comes to eating disorders. It's like, well, why aren't you eating? Well, this is just my body type, right? Like some people can eat an incredible amount of food and never gain any weight from it. Must be nice. I mean, I look at food and gain like 3 pounds, but like we all have different metabolisms, right? And so sometimes there's like hate and judgment on the other side as well. People who are just naturally thin, but not in an unhealthy way can face a lot of that. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm naturally,
Yeah.
and I remember once, like, my dad asked me if I was like anorexic,
Mm-hmm.
like I was.
Yeah. Right. Because there's a lot of discrimination on that side as well. Right. And so I think understanding like body types and like health and like motivations behind it, it's important. Yeah.
Yeah, I've always been thin. I inherited my father's Italian, so it was always fast. I was made fun of, I think, a lot growing up as a child. One in high school, actually, someone asked me like, how come all the other, this was a girl that I knew. She said, how come all the other guys' chests go like this? Theirs goes like this. I was like, I'm fucking over. I'm bored of that.
Right. Yeah. I'm not a doctor. Yeah.
Stuff in chest.
Mhm.
I'm like, good one, Dad. Like, yeah, I growing up, there's always a fear of mine. Even recently, like people will like make fun of how thin my legs are or something like that. But and that's why the game was so inspiring me.
Yeah.
Because and something that I was thinking of what you guys were talking about, like health and whatnot, is that it's supposed to be like as long as you're healthy, like it's performance based, it's not appearance based. And I think when we start questioning after like something is being its appearance, then it becomes an issue because like as long as you're healthy, like as long as you're gonna live long and be able to perform your life good,
Mhm.
then there's nothing wrong with the way you look, you know?
Yeah, that's tough on both sides,
Yeah.
right? Right, and just the assumptions and blame and like there's a lot of like cultural factors. The expectation generally, like stereotypically, for women is to be thinner to be attractive, and men to be more muscular to be attractive, right? And the second you don't meet that, there can be backlash for it, and that, you know, can cause people to have a lot of difficulty. It's very much kind of building out the interpersonal, but a little bigger as well. Things in the media, right? Like, I mean, you see images in the media and nobody looks like you. It can have that seeping in effect of like, well, I'm not attractive like they are.
And
Yeah.
I was just,
And that's fine, right?
And I should mention that, so when you mentioned film software, I don't know if Sekiro does this, but a lot of their other games do an excellent job of this because they allow you to play as a wide variety of body types. You can go like average, slender, large builds, you can customize like chest to lower body ratio, and they allow you to play as a wide variety without glorifying any one idealized world.
Right.
Which I can't stop thinking about what you mentioned from software, because they're just phenomenal. So-
yeah, it's amazing.
And that's wonderful, right? That's what you hope for. I mean, that's like obviously the ideal. Was there, did I see, was that a?
Well, I was just gonna say from software, this game, like, I didn't realize how like good it actually is, but Bloodborne, you play as one of the, if you play as a female character, you're like just jacked for like no reason.
Okay.
You're just this huge jacked person, and it's awesome. And then one of the other games, one of the hardest bosses to fight is this like big lady chick, and it's like awesome.
There's a variety, right?
It's really interesting, but when you mentioned media and from software got mentioned, I was like, yeah, like, there's a lot of like, jacked kind of things.
Right, and that's wonderful, right? Again, the variety is wonderful, and we can talk a little bit more about this next time since we are kind of up against the clock, but all of these things, I mean, and it's fantastic when we have great representation. It's not always the case, sadly, but it is nice that there are more things going. I want to check that out now, right? My kids are big gamers, or at least two of them, so anyway, we'll stop here. Don't forget to work on this over the weekend, right? And then I'll see you all on Monday. Yeah.
So, citations, should we find them in the